Hi, Mark. Where are you in the world?
Hi, Peter. What's going on? I'm in Shanghai, China for the China International Bicycle Expo, which is just a massive trade and consumer show. Really interesting.
Amazing. So we're recording a pod today where we're just going to talk about what Mark is seeing in China. I'm home in Los Angeles. Mark is in Shanghai. And the pod today is just going to be what Mark is learning in China and what he's seeing there at the bike show. And so here we go. So, Mark, first of all, tell us what it's like there in Shanghai. It's like, set the scene for us.
Well, Shanghai is a city that has 7 times as many people as LA, and it packs those people into only 5 times the amount of space. So it's more population dense. And it's I mean, imagine 5 LAs in terms of space with 7 times the people. It's totally crazy how big this place is. It just goes and goes and goes.
Amazing. So, and tell me about, what's the bike show like? Where is it and what's it like?
Yeah, the bike show is a little bit, there's an expo ground, kind of like for, if there's people here who used to go to Eurobike, where they have a dedicated center just for conferences, and they probably have a conference like every other week all year. And this one is the biggest conference facility I've ever been to. I'll look up what the square feet is we can put in the show notes, but it's got to be like millions of square feet. It's to walk from one side to the other. It takes like 15 minutes. And that's if you don't stop and talk to anybody and you're walking outside, not through the show halls. It takes forever. And
Mark, is all of that filled up with the bike stuff from the show?
Most of it. There were a couple halls that were empty, and then there's some sort of tents in the middle that are empty, like big permanent tents that are kind of empty. But most of the halls are really full. I think it was 7,500 vendors or people that have booths here. So significant amount. And if you think about China and the bike market in China, like for the first day, I kind of couldn't get my head around all the stuff that's there, all these booths that they were obviously for China, the China market. And if you think it's 1.4 billion people, I mean, this is a massive market on its own. They don't need to do business outside of this market to have like a great company. And so there's probably 80% of the companies are B2B companies that are suppliers. Like, you'll go by a booth that does only training wheels, or a booth that does bells, or a booth that just does spokes. And if you've been to any kind of trade show like CES, you're familiar with seeing just these things that's like, okay, somebody has a little business, they're just here to see their accounts. This is very much like that. But then sprinkled in, there's consumer brands, and there are brands from the West, like Colnagel is here, Van Rysel is here. Notably, people like Trek and Specialized are not here at the show, even though Trek and Specialized have about, from what I'm told, they have about 1,000 stores each in China. So they're here, and people that we know from Specialized were at the show, but they're not showing anything there.
Right. Interesting. And who's walking around the show? Is it retailers in China looking at like Colnago bikes? Is it distributors? Is it manufacturers who want to buy those training wheels for their kids' bikes? Like, who's there walking around?
It's everyone. And this was, there was a party tonight at the Rafa Factor clubhouse here in Shanghai, a Zwift collab party. And I was speaking with someone there about the exact thing. Basically, who is it at this show? Because I couldn't tell. And when you see booths where there's B2B booths and B2C booths, I couldn't tell who this show is for. And in the end of the day, it's for everybody you mentioned. It's a bike show. And it's not like at Eurobike, let's say the Thursday and Friday, the first 2 days of this show would be only for industry. And then Saturday and Sunday, they would open it up to consumers. And most of the people in the industry would leave on Friday because you don't want to be there on consumer days because it's complete chaos. at this show, it was just chaos from the beginning because I think they just let everybody in, and the tickets are free. You have to sign up for a ticket, but it's totally free, and it's super easy to get into. The trade fairgrounds is it's pretty nice. There's actually a really interesting shopping mall right next to the expo grounds, and in that shopping mall, which is brand new, there are only kind of outdoor brands like Salomon, Descent, On Running, Mammut. It's really kind of a cool mall. There's a cool bike shop in there. So, I mean, there's a lot going on in China, a lot going on in Shanghai. It's really interesting in terms of the bike world.
And so there are also consumers, like just bike riders interested in what's going on with bikes who are walking around there. It's not only B2B.
Yes, there's people who are doing the thing where, like at Sea Otter, like, do you have any stickers? I mean, there's a ton of that.
Right.
And it's probably 25 to 30%. I was only at the show the first 2 days, but it was probably, I would guess, 25 to 30% of the people were consumers, and the rest was industry. And it was industry from all over the world. I mean, Europeans, there are some Americans, tons of people from India, you name it. There's just people from everywhere.
So, Mark, tell us what you're seeing there if you zoom out. You know, one of the things you and I have been talking about a lot, we were together at Sea Otter Classic, and there was the launch of the X-Lab brand, the Chinese brand, a bike brand, very premium, owned by XDS in China, one of the largest bike manufacturers in the world. We saw the Amflow mountain bike, e-mountain bike there, owned by DJI. Like, what are you seeing with, like, are more and more Chinese brands going to come to the West? What's the state of the industry? What's your, like, big takeaways from the event?
Yeah, I mean, the first big takeaway, and I heard this from a distributor of a European brand who's the Chinese distributor I was talking to, and he said the Chinese market was off by 70% this year for road bikes. 7-0. If that happened in America, it'd be like a collapse of the industry. But what I understand is that while America, during COVID 2020, 2021 into 22, the market just started growing like crazy for American brands. And then in 22, like halfway through 22, we hit the peak and everything started going backwards fast. China was different. China didn't start to grow until America started coming down. And so like 22 and 23, so they were on a growth curve, and now it's starting to collapse. And so one of the things, Peter, we've had a thesis that we've talked about, which is that the Chinese brands like XLab or XDS and Amflow, the reason they're coming to America now is because American brands canceled their orders during 2022 and 23, and it left them with no choice but to have to find a place to sell their bikes and their products. And that is true for sure. But there's also this thing that's happening now where the market's collapsing here, and they're having to look to other places to sell their bikes. So in terms of these people coming to the West and to the United States, no question. Like they're thinking about it. I've had many conversations here with people who are working on it, and I am certain that American consumers are going to be seeing some of these brands very soon.
Super interesting. And Mark, I know some friends of yours and mine are there. Are you seeing many people from, Europe and America there from bike brands that are there, like, taking a look around?
Yeah, it's interesting. To be honest, I didn't see that many until tonight when I went to this Rafa Factor Zwift party. And I was looking at a picture I took, and like half the people are industry people, mostly from Europe. And it's really interesting. There also are people from America, like the guys from Wahoo are all here. The guys from Factor Bikes, which Factor isn't really an American brand, but they have a significant presence in America. And they're also they have investment from a Chinese company, a large Chinese bike maker, kind of a traditional bike maker. And so that's why they're standing up They had one of the bigger booths at the show, and they had kind of a booth that you would recognize from being at like a Western trade show. Like they were really marketing, they were going hard. And the Chinese brands don't do that. They're just not there yet. They'll get there, I think, but they're not there. And interestingly, Van Rysel, which is owned by Decathlon, and they've been making really big moves in the last couple of years. They had probably the biggest booth at the show. It was stunning how big. It was probably 50 feet by 50 feet. And they had real marketing. They had a lot of cool stuff going on. And I would say they're really signifying their intent to do something big in China.
Mark, you're bringing up some interesting points about like the marketing component of all these brands, whether it's Western or Chinese. And one of the things we've seen with the Chinese brands like XLab is their branding and marketing is just not really up to the kind of Western premium standard yet. Even though their prices are amazing and their product is beautiful.
Right.
Where do you see the Chinese brands that are trying to sell in the West? Like, where are they in terms of like evolving their brand and like aligning with kind of like Western tastes and interests?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like one of the things that is you can't be in Shanghai and not see is the car industry. There were at one point there were something like 300 different EV makers in China, Chinese EV makers. And now 300. Now it's down to like they think around 125. But you see all these EV brands in China that sort of look like Western brands. Like they're one I saw today is sort of a combination of a Range Rover and a Bentley. And it was such a cool car, but it's just a little bit off still. It's maybe like 10% off. And I think that they went from being sort of impossible, like just not even, a tenable kind of brand, to being like pretty close. And the bike market's doing the same thing. Like when you go around this show in Shanghai and look at, it's mostly road bikes. They don't really do mountain bikes, the Chinese brands. And when you go around the show and look, every booth who does a road bike, it's a Tarmac SL8 ripoff, like straight up. And they don't do it perfectly, but they do it really well. And they just count on competing on price. Like it's good enough. And it used to be like, okay, from across the street. Now it's probably from like, okay, 5 feet away, it looks like a Tarmac. But then you get a little closer and you can see like the curves are not quite right, or are different. And they're just off by a little bit. And certainly the branding is I think it'd be hard for anybody to disagree. Like the branding on most of them is not good. I think they'll figure that out because that honestly is not the hard part. They've already figured out the hardest part, which is how do you make these things, make them really high quality, and make them for a price that you could sell them, in any market.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about that, like on the product, as you're describing, they're doing like a paint by numbers recreation of a Tarmac, right? That's like almost there, not quite, but almost. And then they're selling it for really cheap. And I've been thinking a lot, since we're up at Sea Otter about the branding thing, and can they just hire a brand strategist or creative director to get that right? And I would say it's not that easy. Actually, like most really, really strong brands start with a CEO who understands branding and creative and has a point of view. And like, I don't think you can do paint by numbers on really good branding. And so I'm anxious to see how they do that. Obviously, some of their products like BYD cars, the e-vehicle maker, is killing it in Europe, not permitted 100% tariffs, so they're not selling in the US. But I'm really interested to see how they adapt to that. And I'm also interested to see what Western consumers care about. Is like price enough for them to buy the Chinese product, or do they need to also see like a brand that resonates with them? And are they willing to pay another $3,000 or whatever for a Western bike whose brand speaks to them?
Yeah. And I think in here, like a good example is there's a company, I don't know how you really pronounce it, but it's spelled BROSS. And They have a tarmac. Yeah, Bros. They have a tarmac SL8 like ripoff or a clone. And one of the bikes in their booth actually had a great paint scheme. It looked really cool. They had Shimano 105, integrated carbon bar and stem, really nice carbon, like 40 mil wheels, and the bike was $2,000. If you look up the same spec on a Specialized, I think it's about $6,000.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I know XLab has some of that going on too. They have one entry level bike that's $1,300. And I know you sent me recently, I think it was a WindSpace bike that was with DuraAce components for $5,600, which is like, that's half essentially what you'd pay from a Western brand.
It's so insane. It is insane. And so I think you're just going to see that the people who want to pay for brand and who want to know they have the best, and like at this party tonight, there were a lot of people who rode their bikes, and those people were riding Pinarellos and Factors and Specialized. Like they were riding Western brands because they're sort of hardcore. But I can see where the market's just going to go up and down. The middle's going to go away for the Western brands, and they're going to have to go up, and the Chinese brands are going to start owning. Like 105 and down, I really feel like that's going to be Chinese brands. And Ultegra, that we might battle over Ultegra, and then Durace and up is going to be Western brands.
Yeah, and I would say, like, as a buyer, you got to really love that Pinarello logo on the down tube to spend another, let's say, $4,000 just for that, because the bikes themselves, it's the same Shimano DuraAce or SRAM components. The frames are all made in the same Asian factories, right? So the frames really like are not any different. It's literally just the paint job that you're spending the money on.
Yeah, something I didn't expect is this idea I think is going to happen, which is there's a couple of Chinese brands that are actually pretty cool. There's one called Evolve, and they have a wheel brand called Elite. I guess the factory started as a wheel brand. And the Evolve frames, they look really good. And their frame, like their sort of version of a tarmac with integrated carbon bar and stem, seat post, headset, is like $23.99. And it looks amazing. It looks so cool. And I feel like I was with Eric Min, who's the CEO of Zwift. And Eric and I were both like, we're getting one of those. And what I could see happening is people who are in the know start buying some Chinese brands, and then it starts to kind of build up the company, just, by people seeing it around and like giving it a different take or a different opinion about it. So I feel like there's going to be people like us who have all had like every kind of bike you could imagine that are like, all right, this is interesting, I'll give that a shot.
Right. I mean, Mark, do you think the Chinese brands like the one you're talking about, Evolve, could those become sort of cool in a way and desired in the same way people desire, I don't know, a Pinarello, which represents the Italian heritage, maybe Colnago, or Specialized, which really represents like winning at races? And could Chinese brands become sort of like desired from a brand point of view in some ways?
I think they will, but I think it's going to be a little bit different. Like if you think about, I would compare brands like Pinarello to sports cars, like Porsche and Audi and Ferrari, etc. I think those Western brands like that are always going to have this cachet that's going to be difficult to match. And I think if a Chinese brand wins the Tour de France, okay, maybe they're on that playing field. But until they do that, I don't think they're quite going to have that same appeal. But they will, I think, for a lot of people. If you think about like a Lexus is so highly regarded by a lot of people. I think that we could see some brands that are like Lexus type brands where, okay, we know that it came from China, but we also, it's cutting edge. It's as good as anything else in the market. And I think people will still like respect it and like it. It just won't have exactly the same cachet.
Right. You know, I've been watching XDS, the Chinese frame manufacturer, sponsor teams in pro cycling. So last year they came on board with the Astana team, which is really not perceived as a cool team. They don't really have any star riders. And nobody knows what XDS is anyway, because it's a factory. It's a manufacturing business, a very big one, but it's a manufacturing business. Then last December, they came on board the Laboral Spanish women's continental team. And I just noticed today, I was watching the Vuelta before our recording, and they've changed the name of their bikes from XDS to XLab, which is the new brand that XDS launched at Sea Otter. And so I'm wondering how that's going to play out, like sponsoring teams. Are they going to create content around that? Like, I have no idea. We'll see.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, the XLab people that we've spoken to, they're super smart. They're, they have an office in the US with a bunch of really good people. And I think they're going to adapt the playbook pretty fast, and they're definitely in the vanguard. And when you speak to people here in China in the industry, XDS is really respected as a company. Everybody knows it. It's just a monster of a company. And when you go around the streets in Shanghai, you see lots of XDS branded bikes because they're so well known here. It's probably the one bike other than Giant. Those are the two brands I've seen the most of just average Chinese people riding.
Interesting. And okay, so you're talking about people riding bikes there. Mark, have you gotten out for a bike ride in China yet?
No, I feel bad. I didn't bring any kit because I was like, wow, I don't have a bike. I'm not taking a bike. This is my third international trip in 6 weeks, so I'm kind of worn out. I wish I would have, because there's rides every morning, and the guys from Zwift, they brought bikes or borrowed them from Factor, and they're getting out on rides. So I should have brought a bike. I should have brought some kit, because it would be fun, and I would learn a lot about the market. But right. I did not do that.
Right. Next time. I want to come next year and we'll bring bikes. Okay. Mark, anything else you want to share before we wrap up and go to freewheeling?
Yeah, I would say just generally, to sort of recap, I do think there will be Chinese brands coming. I think a lot of them are not going to succeed because it's tough. It's tough to make the leap and to go from, I had a great conversation with somebody who really explained this to me, that at this show, every other year you'll see new brands, and the brands are owned by factories. And every other year they start a new brand because the last brand they started didn't work. And the reason why is because if you own a factory and you understand how to manufacture, then you understand the math around manufacturing. And the math is, hey, if I make an investment in this factory and I add 10% more capacity, I can do 10% more revenue theoretically, and I could make more profit. Versus if I start a brand and I have to do marketing and sales and customer support and all these other things that I don't know how to do I really want to do that? They don't stick it out. And so there are a lot of brands who are probably, showing a public face and who won't stick it out because they don't have the stomach for learning how to do marketing and sales and customer support. But there are a few who obviously do. I mean, if you go by, right next door to the Factor booth here is a brand called Phoenix, that's spelled with an F. It's a really big company. They sponsor race teams. They have a complete line of bikes, from city bikes to mountain bikes to gravel bikes to road bikes. They have everything. A company like Phoenix knows how to market and sell and support their product. Companies like that will be coming hard. And so I do think there's going to be several brands that will break through. And I think they're going to drop the price to some degree. I will remind everybody that when Canyon came into the market, everybody thought Canyon was going to force the price of bikes down by 30 or 40% in the United States. That didn't really happen. Canyon had a really big impact, and they continue to have a really big impact. But the result hasn't been that the price of bikes dropped by 40%. I think the result was the price of bikes did drop, especially in certain categories, but also Canyon saw that like there's some elasticity in what people will pay for a bike, and they could actually bring their prices up in certain categories. So I think it's going to be complicated. It's not like overnight bikes are going to cost half as much. Like I just don't see that happening. But I do think there's going to be a lot more competition from brands that people don't know. And I think one thing that we could probably do in our next episode is just talk through what are the brands that are really interesting. I could give a breakdown of the brands I saw here that I think probably had the best chance of doing something good here, good in the United States.
You know, Mark, you and I have talked a lot about like the K-shaped economy. And do we see that coming to bikes where you have this lower price tier with like Chinese product, and I guess you'd put Canyon in there, that's like way down here. And then you have these very premium brands way up here that are 30-40% more. And like they're like basically two separate categories in a way.
Yeah, that I think.
And I would say what I would observe from there are brands that are going to be caught in the middle that are going to really be in trouble if they don't really have a strong brand that justifies that high-end price, and they're getting undercut on the low end. They're stuck in this no man's land and they've got nowhere to go. And so I do think it'll weed out some businesses that are not compelling.
I would say if you're a Western brand who's been trying to compete on price and is just speccing standard stuff and not innovating at all, you're gonna get caught in the middle of this really quick.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Mark, thank you for the update. Why don't we just go now into our freewheeling section, and where we talk about whatever else is on our mind this week, because we're here and it's this week. I'll tell you what I've been thinking about is, you know, the war in the Middle East in Iran is still going. Energy costs continue to climb. Gas prices still going up. Like we're into like the $7-8 a gallon range here in California, which is insane. And it's making me think about, as it relates to bikes, every kind of shipping for every product is getting more expensive. I mean, that's from groceries to cars to bikes and bike parts. Like that's all going up. Everything is just gradually getting more and more expensive. Affordability already, even before this war, was like the single most important topic on the mind of so many, people in this country. And so where does that, like, the cost of living just continuing to go up, inflation going up, where does that start, like, taking away from people's, the amount of money they have to spend on a bike? Like, where's that going to end up?
Yeah, I think it's a huge problem, and it could be part of the contributor of what's going on in China. I'm not sure of that, but hearing the bike market's off 70% here, there's got to be something going on in that regard. It's interesting because in the recent past, like in the 2008 financial crisis and in 2001, when there was the internet meltdown, the dot-com meltdown, bike sales actually got better. In 2008, it was markedly better when a lot of white-collar people didn't have jobs because they had time to ride bikes and they bought bikes. I don't think this is the same thing. I think this is a much deeper cut, potentially. And I think it's much more confusing. What we're seeing in the U.S. is like the stock market is totally detached from how people feel about the economy. It just keeps going up and up and up. But average Americans are, I think the last time I looked, inflation was about 25% since 2020, and wages are fairly stagnant. So people must be hurting already. And the add-on, like the cost of fuel or anything related to oil, it's going to hurt regular Americans.
Although, on top of that, typically when there's been an energy crisis and the price of gas has gone up, more people do get on their bikes to commute because it's much cheaper than driving a car. And I am interested to see if that holds now or not. I have no idea. At the same time, infrastructure is gradually getting better than it has been in the past in the United States. Still not great. We got a long way to go, but it is gradually improving, even here in Los Angeles. And so I'm really interested to see. And now you have, as opposed to energy crises in the past where we didn't really have e-bikes, now there are e-bikes. So people can commute to work without getting sweaty and wear their same clothes. And so I'm really interested to see what happens with bike commuting, and do more people use that, and does that get better?
Yeah, it could, like you said, with e-bikes, it could help. You and I both saw at the Bicycle Leadership Conference that e-bike sales were projected to be pretty flat for a while, like out into the future. Maybe this will really help e-bike sales. I would hope.
Yeah. All right. Anything else on your mind that you're thinking about?
I want to think about what my freewheeling thing is, but I've been so wrapped up in this show and this trip, I don't have one, except after 3 trips in 6 weeks, I feel kind of like garbage. So probably what I need is an event that's in, like, what month is this? May? I probably need an event in July or August to do so that I have a reason to, like, get fit. So I'm trying to figure out what event. I would love to do SBT, but it's too soon. I think it's like right around the corner, right? So I got to figure out a gravel event that I can kind of train for as a reason to, like, try to get fit.
Mark, I'm in the same position, and this week I'm really diving into my training program. I'm doing an AI assisted program from FastCat, which is really interesting. And I put as my target event for the short term the L'Etape de Tour de France Femme that you and I did together last year. I'm going to do it again this year. That's a really hard sort of fondo event, and I'm really, like, diving into my training now, which is, it's really fun, like doing intervals and like riding hard. It's really cool. I'm excited about that.
I got to look at the map for that. I haven't looked at the course for that yet.
It goes over Mont Ventoux. So that's a massive and super hard climb. And then the other thing I'm just thinking about these days is, I was watching the women's Vuelta this morning, and I'm just thinking a lot about women's cycling and the opportunity. You and I were there at the Tour de France Femme last year, and there were so many people riding. I think the top last year was 6,000 people, 2,000 women in the ride. I hear it's going to be double the size this year. So 4,000 women and 12,000 overall, which is pretty incredible for a road cycling event in Europe, the number of women out riding. And I was looking, the Breakfast Club that I ride with in Texas, they're getting these huge number of women out for their women's only rides. And so I'm just thinking about the potential for women's cycling. And I think it's such an interesting potential for the business. But what I have learned in many years of working with marginalized communities, whether it's Latino and Black kids in the film business, whether it's Latino kids in distance running, or getting all these communities into bikes, if you don't build an actual on-ramp to take the hurdles away, to get a new community onto bikes, like, here's a perfect example, NICA High School Mountain Bike Racing League, that has coaches and schools and regions and, like, training. And, like, if that league wasn't built, you wouldn't have 30,000 high school kids riding mountain bikes, racing mountain bikes. And so what I don't see are enough brands and events building on-ramps for women and people of color, for that matter, to get into bikes. Like, you gotta build, like, a whole, like, system to get them on board. And, like, the Breakfast Club in Austin has done that. They have a weekly women's ride, and then the women get comfortable riding in a group. Then they come out to the big group ride, and that's how they have hundreds and hundreds of women riding together. Anyway, so I just feel like that's a huge market that the bike industry is not taking seriously enough.
Yeah, that reminds me of Chris Froome was at this party because he's a a factor investor and ambassador, and I was speaking to him about what he's up to these days since he retired. He retired. He is starting a foundation and a school in Rwanda, I think, where where he's going to, like you said, get more people on bikes and get the best athletes on bikes. And what he said was he was a runner when he was a kid, and he had shoes. There were lots of people he raced against who didn't even have shoes, and he said those kids would crush him. And in his mind, when he was racing bikes, he always thought about those kids and how much better they were physically than him, but they just didn't have the opportunity. And so he wanted to go back and get the opportunity started for, like you said, develop on-ramps for these kids so that they could be the best in the world at racing.
Amazing. That's awesome.
We should get him on the podcast. He's a great guy.
We should get him on the pod. I got to ride with him here 2 years ago when he was training in LA, and he's such a nice person. I really liked it, and he was great. That was a really fun ride. Okay, Mark, I think that's it. We'll let you go back to China, and we'll talk to you here in the States next week. Thank you for your time. Thanks for staying up late to record with us.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we'll see you soon, Peter.